Good night, everyone. Tonight, God is good and God is good all the time. We still talking about David. Um, and now last package we talk about how David had just become to be king over Israel after 20 years. Okay, so now he's a king over Israel. Now he learned about his name being great. He learned about anybody gonna know him and everything. So God gonna confirm to let him know you're gonna be great. You're gonna be great. So this is God's promise to David. It's gonna come from 2 Samuel chapter 7, 1 through 17. So after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him. So, he become to be king over Israel. He got his own palace, so he living up good right now. Cause seem like the 20 years was worked his way. So, so David is finally settled in his house, experience God give a rest from surrounding enemies. So he had said to Nathan, to prophet, here I am, living in a house of Caesar. While the order of God remained in the tent. So all the kings they had, this is the same tent, that was still with the Israelites when they escaped from Egypt. Now they were supposed to settle this tent somewhere, but the tent is still following them everywhere they go. So this David dwelling and selling, a permanent and secure while to art, the symbol of God's presence. So Nathan replied to the king, whatever you have in mind. So now, this the time, David's thinking about the temple and all this kind of stuff, when God gonna tell him, this temple been following the Israelite for a long time. Why have not been settled in a temple somewhere? So you have in mind, he said, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you. Now David had perceived, it was in his heart to build a house of God. And so he proceeded to build the house of God. But it was a good work and it fit, for a king to do. And it might think that this was a proper time, that in it is being encouraged. But that's Mike. So that night, the word of the Lord had came to Nathan. So Nathan is a prophet that God always sent him as a messenger, to the rest of his prophet. He said, go tell your servant David, this is what the Lord said, that you are the one that built a temple to dwell in. But this message from Nathan, God was saying that he didn't want David to build, a house for him. That we learned that God did not want his temple built by a warrior. So David had made plans to collect the material, so that his son Solomon could begin the work on the temple. As soon as he became king, because see, he was a king, David ain't too long been the king. He realized the temple been following the Israelites everywhere they go and have not been in a secure place. And so also by God turning him down by building the temple, but God still has some good news for him. So the king over Israel, which he are now, but God don't want him to build the altar. But God still has some good news for him though. So I have not dwelt in a house from the day that I brought the Israelite up out of Egypt in this day. So I've been moving. He been moving from place to place, and every time they move from place to place, the tent had to follow them. That's what the art and all that good stuff that Moses, had written on tablets and stuff like that. So all that important stuff that's in that tent. So now God feel like it's time for the temple, to have not, have anything, permanent going place to place. Since he had brought the Israelite up out of Egypt to this day. The temple, that tent been following them. It was supposed to be placed in a secure place, but they're traveling with the tent everywhere they go, place to place. So wherever I have moved without the Israelite, did I ever have said to any of their rulers whom I command, to shepherd my people Israel? You know, so have I not built me a house of season? You know, so since David had been king over the Israelites, he had not offered to build a temple until now. And that's what God gonna say. You know, the temple been with y'all for a while. You know, why now that you decide that you want to build a temple? You know, so the tent, you know, the tent been traveling with them under David's care ever since God brought them out of Egypt. You know, so now then, you know, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty said. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flocks, you know, upon you ruled over my people. You know, so God said, I took you from, you was in the field, shepherding your sheep and everything, you know, so I took you from the farm, you know, and I brought you into the palace, you know, because he know David feel a type of way now. His feelings, he in his feelings right now because God don't want him to build the temple, but God let him know, you're in the palace. You know, I took you from the field, you know, I brought you into the palace. You know, so God reminds David of the three things, you know, that God had done for David in the past. You know, God took David from being a shepherd, you know, to be now he a prince over the Israel. You know, he took him from following the sheep, you know, to be a prince over my people Israel. So now God reminds David, you know, what he did for him because David is sad and he is not building the temple. You know, so I have been with you wherever you go. You know, so God telling him, when you was running from cage to cage, running from your enemies, kept running from Saul, I was with you wherever you went, with protecting you. You know, so I've been with you wherever you have gone. You know, I have cut off all your enemies before you. You know, so now I will make your name great. Now you're not gonna build a temple. You know, but I'm about to make your name great. You know, so like the names of the greatest men on earth. Now, they got great men, you know, on earth. You know, but God said, your name about to be great just like this. You know, and these are some great men, you know, God said on earth. But I'm about to make yours great just like this. You know, so now God had established David, you know, to give him rest over his enemies. And God also said, he will make David's name great. You know, now this God promised to David. You know, so while David is, you know, was running from Saul, running from his enemies, running from cave to cave, God was with him. God was with him everywhere he went. Because, see, he wasn't in position yet. You know, God made a promise to him when he was 17 years old. You know, so God was with him everywhere he went. You know, because God, this is like God was with Joseph. Until Joseph got ready in position. He was where God wanted him to be at, you know, but he wasn't in position where God told him. God said, I'm going to make you a leader. You're going to be in charge. You're going to be this and that. It never had happened until 20 years later. You know, but God was with him everywhere he went. So God said, I've been with you wherever you went. Wherever you went, I was with you. You know, so remember, David, you know, you got anointed since about 17 years old. But it took 20 years. In those 20 years, God was protecting David the whole time. And see, a lot of times, David didn't know. David know, but God was right there with him. God was right there with him. You know, because God he was not in position yet, so God was protecting him until he get on his and get it in position. You know, and so all the activities and everything that David was doing, you know, that's why God said you shed too much blood, and that's why you can't build a temple. You know, remember he killed the husband, you know, killed the woman's husband and wound up married the woman. You know, that was blood he shed without God telling him to go deal with wars and all that kind of stuff. This was stuff he did on his own. You know, so, and I will provide a place for my people, Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. You know, because, see, they kept on having You know, because, you know, God had given them their own land, but they kept letting people push them out, you know, having them being slaves, living in captivity in their own land. You know, so God said, I'm about to give you a land, you know, and you ain't going to be disturbed. You know, he said, there ain't nobody going to disturb you this time. You know, so there was their own land, give them their own land, so they won't be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them no more. You know, so as they did at the beginning. At the beginning, God gave them a promised land with milk and honey and stuff. You know, but they let people come in the land, you know, and have them in captivity in their own land, oppress them in their own land. So God said, I'm not going to even have y'all being disturbed this time. You know, so evildoers will not continue to oppress them as they have done. You know, and I will provide, you know, a homeland for my people, Israel, planting them in a secure place where they will never be disturbed. You know, saying have done ever since the time I appoint leader over my people Israel, I will also give you rest, you know, from all your enemies. You know, so the Lord declared that the Lord himself will establish a house for them. You know, so God had promised to David future. You know, so God is about to promise David future. You know, so God promised to David future, you know, appointing a place for his people so they won't be disturbed. So they have their own place. And two, God will make a house for David. You know, establish a kingdom and a place for David. Now, see, this is all the good news that God had for him. God not allowed him to build a temple, but God is giving him good news. You know, so make David's name great. So these are three things. He gonna put a place for his people. You know, and God will make a house for David. You know, establish a kingdom. He about to establish a kingdom for David. You know, and make David's name great. You know, so that's good news right there. You know, so when your days are over and you rest with your ancestor, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. So David getting a kingdom established. And anybody in his bloodline gonna be the only one can sit on that throne after David. You know, and the last one in the bloodline gonna sit on that throne gonna be Jesus. You know, because Jesus in David's bloodline. So these words, you know, from God to David, this is a powerful promise. A powerful promise, you know, with application right then and fall from it. So now the other promises in David's son Solomon. You know, that who will indeed build a house, a temple for the dwelling God glory. You know, now he is the one who will build a house, you know, for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. You know, so Jesus Christ, you know, our David King will never die, and nothing can bring him down from his throne. You know, so God promised that he will secure his throne. You know, and I will be his father, you know, and he will be my son. You know, and when he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod, you know, and amend with infliction human being. You know, so details the relationship that God will have with this coming son of David. You know, God said that he will be a father to this man. It is important that we remember when this promise is being made. You know, we, you know, in a new covenant church are used to the idea of God being our Father. You know, so your house and your kingdom will endure forever. You know, this God promised to David. You know, he said your house and your kingdom will endure forever. Before your throne will be established forever. So even after David gone, his kingdom, his throne, all that will be established forever, because nobody but in his bloodline gonna be able to be on that throne. You know, so he ain't got to worry about anybody else, you know, in the land trying to fight to get on the throne. It's going to be bloodline after bloodline after bloodline who going to be on that throne. You know, now David request to build a temple was good, you know, but God said no. You know, so this does not mean that God reject David. You know, in fact, God was planning to do something even greater in David's life. You know, so then allowing him builders the temple. You know, although God turned down David's request, he promised to continue the house of David forever. You know, so even though he turned down him building a temple, he still established his kingdom. You know, still giving him blessing after he gone. You know, and just like Abraham, still blessed after that to his ancestors, the Israelites. You know, so Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. The Lord will raise up David offspring, and the Lord will establish his kingdom. You know, a kingdom that will never, you know, be destroyed. You know, so he will build a house for the name of the Lord and throne, and his kingdom will be established forever. You know, so see, David was in his feelings. You know, David's feelings got hurt because God had taken him down to building the temple. You know, but God still had good news for him. You know, greater news for him. God said, I'm going to make your name great. You know, because you're the king. You know, and he feel like nobody don't know who he is right now. God said, I'm going to make your name great. And God said, I'm going to establish your throne. You know, after you go. You know, nobody but your bloodline gonna be able to sit on this throne. You know, so God gave him good news. Good news. You know, he thought he was being rejected. He was not being rejected. You know, it's just a lot of stuff that David hadn't did. You know, that he didn't want him to build the temple. You know, so God made David great. So everybody gonna know about David. You know, so that's all the news I have. You know, that's God promised to David. You know, he decided he don't want David to build the temple, but he still have good news for even after his death. You know, for his ancestors. You know, nobody but his ancestors gonna be able to sit on that throne. You know, and so Nathan is a messenger that God had sent to him. He said he replied to the king, whatever you have in mind, go do it. See, David had that in his mind. David slept on it. You know, David dreaming. He dreamed, you know, to build this temple. You know, and God saw his dream. So God took the dream from him, and he, you know, it was God. Idea and everything else. You know, so God took the idea and gave it to Solomon. You know, to build this temple, and it was a beautiful temple that Solomon had did. You know, so that's all I have for you tonight. Y'all have a nice and beautiful, safe night, and I see y'all in the next video.